More than 1 million people have fled their homes in Gaza ahead of an expected ground invasion by Israel. Israeli forces have positioned themselves along Gaza's border in an attempt to dismantle Hamas. A week of airstrikes have already demolished neighborhoods, yet militant rocket fire continues. This as the terror group holds several hundred people hostage. And here with us now is John Ullyot, managing partner at Brighton Strategy Group and former chief spokesman for the National Security Council. John, great to be with you again. As you know, and as mentioned, Israel is poised for its ground invasion into Gaza, with Israeli Defense Minister saying today this will be a long war and the price will be high. John, how do you see this playing out?
Well, this is very different, Tracy, from what we've had earlier with there have been about 3 or 4 different major conflicts with Hamas and Israel. This one was precipitated by the real massacre of 1,400 Israelis, something that's never been seen before. It was really like, for example, us having way more people than, or having the U.S. have way more people than died in 9/11. So, I mean, it was their 9/11, or some people said it's their Pearl Harbor. So that's the precipitating incident. So right now there's just absolute unanimity in the Israeli populace, all sides of both parties, or all parties rather. They have a multi-party system to really finish the job, if you will, with Hamas by not just having a few airstrikes and that be it. So right now you're going to have a little bit of a tension as the Israelis mount their offensive. It's a lot of tension between the international community that's going to talk about tamping this down and the will of the Israeli people, backed hopefully by a lot of people in the international community, to say, look, this is way over the pale what has been done to the Israeli citizens, beheadings, bringing hostages, close to 200 hostages into the Gaza Strip. And so this is something where you're going to have that tension between some in the international community pressuring Israel to halt their offensive and Israel wanting to finish the job against Hamas.
Yeah, John, I want to talk about that, those hostages that are being held by Hamas. I mean, how does that factor into this offensive? What do they need to do?
Well, look, there's close to, the estimates are 199 hostages, according to the Israelis. And so right now, once again, the Hamas, they fight very dirty. They will go and behead, like they did here, over 1,000 Israelis in their homes, children, women, et cetera, bring those hostages back. And then they'll hide behind not only those hostages, but also their own populace, by telling their own populace in the northern part of the Gaza Strip not to evacuate to the south, that the Israelis have warned them to do. So what's going to happen here is Hamas is going to try to use these hostages like human shields. And there's up to 29 Americans that are held there. There's a little bit of a different number count, but right now you have Americans among those hostages. And so maximum pressure needs to be put on Hamas. Right now, for example, there's a lot of pressure that Hamas and the Palestinians are putting on to open the south and have a humanitarian corridor. Well, the world community needs to tell these guys, look, you have hostages that you need to give up right away before you become people who can demand anything at this stage in the early part of this conflict.
Yeah, and there's a lot of concern about the humanitarian effort there, too. CNN reported just a short time ago, I believe, that 5 U.S. trucks did enter Gaza, but for the most part, the humanitarian aid, it's really stuck at the Gaza-Egypt border with things like, vital supplies and clean water dwindling. The UN Secretary General warns that the Middle East is on the verge of an abyss. John, I want to get your thoughts on that. And is there any way in an instance like this, to prevent a civilian catastrophe?
Well, you talk about a civilian catastrophe, you have the electricity and water was shut off for a while. There have been reports that some have been put back on in Gaza. But once again, this is something that we have to take a step back and say, this is a humanitarian crisis that's wholly of Hamas's making. They, out of nowhere, there was no problem before, and they had this very brutal, just barbaric attack on the Israelis. And so now, in terms of solving that humanitarian crisis in the south and letting some humanitarian aid come in, that is something that is dependent on the security situation. There's a lot of finger pointing. Hamas and Israel, bottom line, have not been able to agree to a security situation in southern Gaza that Egypt is comfortable with sending those trucks over the border. So right now there's an impasse, but it could shift. As you say, there's a few trucks that have been allowed. The main thing is that U.S. citizens are going to be the priority in getting out of Gaza to the south there. So we can only hope for the best, but I think it'll be a shifting situation over the next 24, 36 hours, and we can only hope for and put pressure on both sides to allow that humanitarian aid to come into Gaza.
Yeah, John, so much more we can talk about. Unfortunately, we have to leave it right there. Great to see you. Thanks so much for weighing in.
Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate it.